from the heart of rural France. This is the Keto Woman podcast, brought to you by me. Hello Keto Lovelies, I'm Daisy Brackenhall, and I've spent most of my life struggling with my weight and confidence, and have always had a difficult relationship with food. Even when I finally got to my target weight, after weight loss surgery and eating low carb, I couldn't maintain it and I was miserable. I've been keto now for over 2 years, and it has given me the freedom to fall in love with food again, without the constant gain, loss, guilt, virtue cycle of before. Health and happiness is where it's at now, running on fat. Welcome to the Keto Woman podcast. Each week I'll be chatting to inspirational women, maybe even the odd man, to discover the secrets to their success so that I can share them with you. So what is keto? Keto is a way of eating that enables you to switch your body's main fuel source from sugar to fat. Who doesn't want to be a fat burner, right? But how do we achieve this? A great place to start is by keeping carbs under 20 grams a day. So things like leafy greens and above ground vegetables, plus some nuts and seeds and the incidental carbs you find in things like full fat dairy. Choose delicious fatty proteins and be free and easy with oily dressings on salad and butter on your veggies. Once you're in the swing of things, you can tweak it to suit you. Make your own personalized keto. You'll hear all sorts of ways to keto from my guests. There is no one way to do keto, no one size fits all. I hope to show you just how flexible and fabulous this way of eating can be. I'm not a doctor, and most of my guests won't be either, so we really can't give you medical advice. It's always best to consult your own doctor when making big changes to your diet and lifestyle, because they know you and your medical history, and so have access to the bigger picture. Wouldn't it be helpful to have one place where you could find all the links? Want to sign up to my new Patreon exclusive Facebook group, Daisy's Lovelies? No problem. How about subscribing to my YouTube channel? Please help me notch up my first 1,000 subscribers by going to links.ketowomanpodcast.com and following the YouTube link. Not following me on Instagram yet? Hit the Instagram button. You get the idea. All the buttons, all the links you need are at links.ketowomanpodcast.com. Thank you, Lynn Choda, for supporting me and this podcast by making a pledge at my Patreon page. Do you want to hear your name here at the top of the show? Are you enjoying this podcast and would like to help me make more episodes? Then head over to my Patreon page at patreon.com/KetoWoman or hit the support button on the Keto Woman podcast website. It means a great deal to me, and you will get to headline the show just like Lynn did today. Welcome to episode 107, where I'm joined once again by extraordinary woman Siobhan Huggins. Siobhan is an independent researcher focused on lipidology, the immune system, and metabolic diseases. She spends most of her time at cholesterolcode.com, where she works alongside Dave Feldman. She has been keto since August of 2016 and on a predominantly carnivorous diet as of October 2017. She has lost 80 pounds, reversed hypertension, and found a passion for research along the way. It's always great to catch up with Siobhan, and this was no exception. It was her idea to group together a series of episodes about Keto AF, starting with April Eiley, who you may remember as Extraordinary Woman number 100. This recording was just long enough to split into two, and as I have had a hellish couple of days with no power at my place and have a load of stuff to get through before I go to the UK on Wednesday for a week, I seized the opportunity. It's really hard trying to navigate a house and not trip over your dogs and try to cook for them and yourself by the light of those silly little tea lights. I was so relieved to get home this evening to find it back on again, I can't tell you. By the time this is tickling your earbuds, I will be spending much look forward to time with my niece and nephews, and the grown-ups, of course. I hope you have a lovely weekend too. Welcome back, Siobhan, to the Keto Woman podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well today. Happy to be back.
And we are in the same time zone.
Yes, for once. I am recording from Sweden, where my boyfriend lives.
And you've been there for a while.
Yeah, I've been here about 3 months, and I actually head back home tomorrow. I'll have like a 1-day gap where I'm back in Indiana for like 2 seconds, and then I head out to Houston, where I'll be speaking at Low Carb Houston on the 24th.
So that's going to be a bit of a whirlwind. Travel, change of time zones, jet lag, presentation.
Interestingly, I don't usually get jet lag. I wonder if partially it's because I don't eat on the plane and I always make sure to sleep. And I schedule my flight so it's early enough that I can sleep and then I wake up and it's morning again. It's usually not bad.
I have read it's the best way to deal with jet lag is to fast while you're traveling, and then immediately wherever you arrive, whenever you arrive, is to just fall straight into the schedule there, however uncomfortable it might be. So, you know, if you arrive early morning and you're really tired, don't sleep. You just fall into the pattern of where you arrive and eat when they're eating rather than when you might have eaten according to where you've come from.
Yeah, well, my mom doesn't eat very often, so I probably won't do that. Probably what I'll do is have like a really big cup of just like butter coffee, because I found a really nice way to make it that I like, that kind of mixes, like emulsifies it, I guess, as opposed to having like a layer of butter on the top. And that will usually keep me much fuller than an actual meal, interestingly. So then I should be able to make it through the flight just fine.
Yeah, I was reading about that. You shake it up in a blender or something.
Yeah, the only caveat I have to say to that for anyone wanting to try it is just make sure the coffee is only hot enough to melt the butter and not like fresh off the stove or from the drip machine or whatever. Because if you shake something hot enough in a blender bottle, it will explode because the steam builds up. So yeah, I usually just shake it for a while and then open up the lid away from my face just in case to let off the steam, and then I'll shake it a bit more. And I'll know it's done when there's like a nice foam at the top.
Yeah, because oil slick on the top is really not appealing, is it?
Not a fan. And then the other problem is with liquid fats in general, I find that they absorb too fast. And then it's kind of like the MCT oil problem where you'll get like disaster pants. But if you emulsify in the liquid, then it's good. It's just like drinking kind of like a latte or something.
That makes the difference. I've had many a blender explosion. I don't seem to be able to find any way around it. I have done it because normally they have the little bit at the top, don't they? Which is presumably is what you're supposed to use when you're blending hot things. But even with that, I found it's still a bit of a nightmare. Yeah. So I tend not to blend hot things.
Yeah. I think if you want to play on the safe side, you can get battery operated milk frothers. And that's just like a stick blender, or you could use a stick blender as well. And then you avoid the whole sealed container issue. So no explosions.
Exactly. I like to go the stick blender route with a nice tall container, and then you're pretty well safe. And how have you found Sweden this time? I mean, it's that time of year, isn't it, where presumably you've got the whole light dark thing going on. It must get dark quite early.
A little bit, but I mean, like all the stores close at like 9, so it doesn't matter anyway.
Right.
Like there's not really 24-hour stores near here. It's good. This time we've kind of set up a thing where we go to Lidl, which has much cheaper price stuff, especially meat, than Eco, which is just kind of like the everyday store we have across the street. And it's way, way cheaper to eat carnivore that way. And when I'm here, my boyfriend will just eat whatever I'm eating for the most part, except he'll have chorizo and I won't. Yeah, so we'll just do that. He'll do a lot of the cooking, luckily, which is good because I don't like cooking.
I get a lot of stuff in Lidl. It's definitely, there's a big difference in price.
Yeah.
Both the meat and the vegetables in particular, actually. I mean, I know you don't
I wouldn't
eat any vegetables, but for me, the difference, some things are just ridiculously expensive.
It is absolutely
Lidl
ridiculous.
can often be half the price of the other supermarkets.
It must be even more than half the price, because if I go to Lidl, I'll get a week's worth of food for like how much it would cost for a day's worth of food at Ica sometimes. Like, it's not even funny.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It can be that difference in price.
They're supposed to be opening up a Lidl that's actually within walking distance of here, so we wouldn't have to take the bus.
Oh, that would be great.
They're supposed to open it in spring, and they still haven't.
taking their time. If they're anything like they are in France, they take forever to build new structures. You see it going up and you think, oh yeah, it won't be long. And it drags on forever.
Yeah, they must be taking like the logom approach, like the not too much, not too little work. That interpretation may differ depending on who you are, but whatever works, I suppose.
But you enjoy your stays in Sweden?
Yeah, I do.
Very different culturally, I imagine.
I don't know. Like when I'm in the US, I don't really go out much. So it's easy not to notice the difference. Like the places I'll go out in the US, I'm usually going out alone. So I don't interact with other people except for like waiters and waitresses, I guess. And Uber drivers. I talk to Uber drivers a lot. Strangely, there are a lot of diabetic Uber drivers, so I now just take like business cards and hand them out every time. Because inevitably they'll ask like what I do for a living, and then, you know, okay, where do I start? And then they'll be like, oh, can you tell me why like my blood work looks like blah blah blah? And granted, every time I have to explain like I'm not a doctor, blah blah blah, but I can say I can offer my opinion from what I've seen in others. And then they'll want like more resources, and it's like, here, I am actually going over to the diet doctor office right after this podcast, and I'm hoping that Andreas has like business cards for diet doctor that I can just take and stick in my wallet, because like my business card actually isn't very helpful because that just directs them to cholesterol code. But if they're diabetic and want to do low carb, I should just be able to have a business card that's like, go to this website, it has everything. There you go.
Yeah, and obviously, when in Sweden, the best place to go to is Diet Doctor anyway.
Yeah, I mean, basically anywhere.
Why do you think that is? Is it to do, it must have something to do with the job then. And it seems to be common in people who drive for a living. And I remember talking to Yogi about that with long-distance lorry drivers. It's something that's quite common.
I mean, the Uber drivers I'm talking about are in the US, so it's probably just that a lot of people in the US are diabetic.
Oh, so more US than it's not something you found in Sweden?
No, I don't usually take Ubers in Sweden because we just walk everywhere or take the bus.
Right.
In Indiana, there's not really public transport where I am. But yeah, it could just be that there's a lot of diabetic people in general, and I'm just exposed to Uber drivers a lot. It could also be that people are taking Uber jobs as a second job because they're lower income, or because they're retired, so they're more likely to be older people, things like that. I don't know, but I enjoy talking to them. They're very interesting people, and usually if you get someone in a one-on-one like that, they're much more receptive to kind of weird things that in a group they might kind of join in with the others and be like, no, that's silly. But one-on-one in general, people seem to be more apt to just ask questions. Like, oh, so you don't eat plants? How does that work? Like, how are you feeling about that? Is it something you enjoy?
And especially when they're the one who have initiated the conversation. They're the one who are asking you questions. So it's not something you're pushing on
I don't
them.
like go up to random Uber drivers and be like, hey, by the way, I don't eat plants. How are you today? No, if they don't ask about my job or they don't ask about like whatever. Usually if I'm traveling somewhere, it's because I'm going to a conference. So if they ask where I'm going, then it'll come up. But if they don't ask about it, I don't mention it. Because that's most of the time I don't want to talk anyway, so I only will if they initiate. So yeah.
So you're just improving the nation's health one Uber driver at a time.
Yeah, there's actually one Uber driver that works close to my house, so I tend to get him a lot. And he's one of the people with diabetes that I've met. I gave him recommendations for like Diet Doctor and everything, and apparently he's tried it and has started looking into it and everything. And he seems to be doing well, so I like to check up on him occasionally if I can.
Fantastic. So we thought it would be nice to, originally we planned this as a follow-on straight away to April's episode, but life intervenes. But it was your idea actually originally to talk to April and then to you and then to Amber all about Keto AF.
Yes.
And so we've had the episodes with April now, which went down an absolute storm. Her story resonated with so many people and they really enjoyed it. So it'd be great now to have that discussion with you. So take it away. I'll let you lead. Let's take a second to talk about wild foods. Wild Foods is a food company that puts quality, sustainability and health first in all of their products. They have everything from coffee to fish oil to mushrooms. Wild Foods adaptogenic mushrooms are the perfect addition to your morning coffee or butter coffee routine. If you haven't used any mushrooms in your coffee before, you're missing out. There is so much research out there on the benefits of mushrooms, and Wild Foods has the highest quality available on the market. They even have their own proprietary blend of mushrooms, turmeric and cocoa powder called the Cocoa Tropic that you have to try to believe. Check out all of the literature and get yourself some of their mushrooms at wildfoods.co. They've given you a 12% discount as part of our partnership, and you can get that with the code KetoWoman. Make sure also to enter the $100 giveaway by clicking the button in the show notes or on the links page at links.ketowomanpodcast.com. Thank you for taking the time out to listen, and thank you, Wild Foods, for sponsoring this podcast.
Keto AF, as people figured out from April's episodes, it does not stand for what you think it stands for. It stands for Keto Animal Foods, which is essentially just describing a carnivorous diet that has more ketogenic proportions, the traditional kind of ratios like 80-20 fat to protein by calorie or 2-to-1 fat to protein by macronutrient gram. So usually that looks like, if you're looking at like a steak that has like Keto AF macros, it would look like visually about 1/3 of it would be fat. So that's a lot of fat.
And quite difficult often to get cuts that fatty, which is why she was finding she was having to add the fat to it to get the ratio to where she needed it.
Yeah, and I add fat as well. I'll either go to my butcher and ask for beef fat trimmings, which they're always super happy to sell to me, because otherwise they have to throw them away, and they obviously don't want to do that if they can get away from that. Or I'll use butter. Like I said, I drink butter coffee occasionally. And I've also introduced dairy, so cream cheese. Last night, I actually mixed my cream cheese for dinner with ghee to up the fat content. It was very good and very filling. But really, it should be thought of as prioritizing fat and not restricting protein, because it's not restriction. It's eating the fat first until you're full to make sure you're reaching satiety. And some people will then eat the fat first and then the protein, or they'll eat it together. But either way, you're not restricting how much protein you're eating. You're not saying, like, I can only eat this much protein and no more. What you're doing is prioritizing fat above everything else. And that seems to be working for quite a few people. And granted, it's not everyone. Like, I have seen a couple people, even carnivores, who say that they do better with higher protein. They lose weight with that. But some people, like April and even me, Josh Blackburn is another person. He has the website ketoanimalfoods.com. He and Amber were the ones I talked to about it. And it does seem to work better for them, especially seemingly for people with issues that aren't going away with just keto. Like, I had been keto for something like 2 years, and then one of those years was carnivore, or maybe like half a year or something like that, when I did my Keto AF experiment. And yes, I had lost like 80 pounds and no longer hypertensive and all that type of stuff, but I still had extra weight lingering. And it had been a year of like just a plateau of nothing. And that's kind of frustrating, because even though like you had gotten so far, people I don't know obviously would sometimes comment on my pictures and be like, oh, but you're still overweight. Like, how do I know carnivore actually works? And that is a legitimate question. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, why aren't I like super skinny? Like, I'm definitely not obese, but I am technically still overweight. So what am I doing wrong? Do I actually have to calorie restrict? Like, what am I doing? And by talking to Josh and Amber, they were talking about how they had tried it, and Josh especially had had a lot of success with it. And they kind of helped me formulate this experiment. And going into it, I expected to fail. Like, there's not really a failing an experiment. As long as you have the method set up right, whatever the outcome is going to be the outcome. But I thought I wasn't going to lose any weight, and I would even gain weight because I'd be eating way too much, and satiety wouldn't work, and I would just be like that special person where I'm like broken on some level or it's not going to work for me or whatever.
Well, it's very difficult to ignore that voice in your own head, but also all the voices out there who are shouting at you.
Yeah.
Even in our community, don't eat that much fat.
Yeah.
Especially when you're talking about weight loss.
Yeah, especially that. And granted, that advice does work for some people. But I have eaten, like at the time, I was eating probably what they would have recommended. I was eating 0 carbs or close to 0 carbs. I had cut out dairy at one point. That didn't do anything. I was eating around 30 to 35% protein and then the rest fat. Like, that's probably pretty close to what would have been recommended for weight loss, and I wasn't losing weight. So it's like, okay, maybe I'll try this other thing that's working for some people and see if it works for me. And I was talking to Josh and Amber a lot through the planning of it, and I was just talking about what if I, eat all this beef fat trimming and I just never get full? Like, what do I do? Because the whole experiment was set up to be ad libitum, so eating as much as I wanted, but just eating the beef fat trimming first and then beef liver, because I was stopping supplementation of folate and then eating cooked ribeye after that until I was full. And I was like, what if I just keep eating? Like, just what if it never stops? And they were like, well, you have to just trust that that's not going to happen. And if it does happen, like, you can think about it then. So I had to really give myself permission to do this experiment in a very strict way, in that the rule was set up, you have to eat fat until you're fat full. Like, that's the rule. That's the experiment. If you don't do it that way, then, like, those are the methods. You can't change the methods halfway through without good reason. And so that's what I did. And for, I think maybe like the first couple days, I was eating a lot, like 2,300 calories, whatever that means. I think it was like 200 grams of fat or something of just beef fat trimming. But then it regulated. And I had done a 7-day baseline where I was just eating my normal diet, but food logging everything. So taking pictures and then logging it later. So I was able to get a good idea of what I was eating before and then compare it to after. And just by eating the fat first, my protein intake did go down. Before, I was eating something like 140 grams of protein per day, which is a lot. And then during the experiment, it averaged about 51 grams of protein per day.
It went down a lot then. So when you say that you're eating fat first, are you literally just eating the fat first, or do you just have to go sort of fat heavy to start with?
Yeah, so it depends on who's doing it. Like, April had been doing just fat heavy with the butter with every bite, but I was actually eating just plain raw beef fat trimming by itself first until I was full, and then I would eat the liver and then the protein portion, which was the ribeye. So in my case, I really was.
Because that sounds tough. I can imagine you doing it because you just will do anything for an experiment. But most people, the thought of doing that is just like, no, I couldn't do that.
The reason that I picked the beef fat trimming is actually because it was the most appetizing pure fat source that I could think of.
Right.
So if anyone else was doing it, it's like, pick the fat that you like. If you like cooked fat on your steak, awesome. Like, if you like really, really fatty brisket that's smoked and dripping in fat, go for that. Like, you have to go for what you enjoy. Otherwise, like, what's the point of eating it? But for me, the most appetizing option was actually the raw beef fat, because I don't like the texture of cooked fat,
right,
which is actually something April had mentioned too. Like, it's just like the liquidiness would make me gag.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons she adds butter, isn't it?
So the raw beef fat is better because it's actually somewhat chewy. And at first it was kind of bland, but as I kept eating it, the pure fat actually tastes sweet. So it was like a sweet, buttery flavor, and then it was like totally delicious. So I was like cool from that point. And I had eaten raw beef fat and raw meat before a couple times. So it was a personal choice on my part. Just something that I felt I could easily do without like gagging every day.
So you're kind of working out what you're planning on eating and working out the macros for that meal and eating fat heavy part of it to start with. Because when you talk about eating it to satiety, to a certain extent, you don't know until you're eating it what that point is.
And that's kind of why I wanted to set it up with eating the fat first, because I didn't know how much fat I would actually need. And after a while of the experiment, I was able to tell, okay, I usually eat around like 140 grams of this beef fat trimming, so then I can just set that out. And at this point, I can now arrange a meal that's about 3-to-1 proportions, which is what I usually eat. And then I don't have to eat the fat first because I already know about how much I need to get full.
I see. So it's not so much a question of you having to do it for any other reason than just filling yourself with the fat first. So until you know how much you need in a meal, you have to eat it first.
It was basically a lesson in learning what satiety was. Because even with carnivore, I would get full, but it wasn't like a satisfying full. And people on Keto AF had been talking about how they'd start eating and then they'd just get like super full and they wouldn't be able to take another bite. And I had experienced that maybe a couple times. I think one point was when I was at Amber's place because she had like really fatty pork chops. But even then, I'd usually be eating more than she was, to where I'd be stripping off the fat cap because I didn't like the cooked fat, and then just eating like 3 of these huge pork chops. And then I just stopped eating because I was bored or mealtime was over, but it wasn't really a feeling of satiety. So part of this experiment was like, okay, if we're going to do this, we're going to figure out what people are talking about because I have no idea. So that's what I did. So I wanted to eat the fat first explicitly to see where my resting point was going to be, because then I don't have to figure out macros. I don't have to do any of that. And it's prioritizing fat, not trying to reach a certain amount of fat. So that's kind of what made sense to me. And surprisingly enough, after a couple days or a week or something, it actually started to regulate out. And by looking back on the data now, the calorie amount was about the same. I think it was like 100 to 200 calories less on average on Keto AF, but I was rapidly losing weight. I think it averaged out to somewhere under, like a little bit under 2 pounds a week. And it was a 3.5 week thing, so I lost 6.5 pounds or so over that experiment. And I had been stalled for like a year. It's like, what happened?
It's interesting. So you can tell from that just how satiating the fat is, because of course it's a little bit more than twice the calorie amount per gram than protein is. So you can tell how much less you're eating.
Yeah, at the same time, I was not eating a super amount more than usual. At meals, I was definitely getting full off of fat. And it was a very interesting experience because by eating the fat first, you'd think you'd be too full for the protein portion, but it's like you have a second hunger.
I was wondering that.
Yeah. So I would eat the fat until the best way I can describe satiety for people who haven't experienced it before is like you have this big plate of food and you're picking up pieces and putting it in your mouth. And after a while, you have a piece like halfway to your mouth and you're looking at it and you just put it back down because you're done. And that's when I would move on to the beef liver, which I was not thrilled about. I hate liver. And every time I say I hate liver, people always come back with recipes and recommendations and you have to try it this way or that way. I don't like liver. And I actually stopped eating liver, I think like 2.5 weeks into the experiment or something, because it was starting to make me sick. And it's not that it was making me sick because it was disgusting. I was finding it more and more disgusting and becoming more and more averse to it until it actually made me physically ill. And I don't know why. A couple people have speculated it might be that I like topped off on something that was in the liver, and the feedback signal I was getting is you do not need any more of that. Please stop eating it. And I didn't listen, which I don't recommend. And then after that point, I was only eating the beef fat and the ribeye, and that's it. But after I finished off the beef fat, I'd eat the ribeye just fine, usually about like 200 grams of cooked meat or so. And then I'd be completely full, and I was eating 1 or 2 meals a day, and that's all I needed. And the interesting thing is that after I started doing this, I had one day of fasting, and I was trying to avoid fasting through the experiment because it's like I want this to be like steady. But there was one day where I was just like not hungry at all. And it's like, okay, how does that make sense? And it's something that I think April had commented on as well, that she had started doing keto AF, and beforehand she had had trouble with extended fasting and dealing with hunger, and I had been experiencing the same thing, even though I was still overweight. But when I went keto AF, after like the first week or two, I started getting the urge to fast again. And that's fascinating to me.
Interesting.
Like, I'm eating essentially the same amount, but it's a different macronutrient composition. And, you know, my hunger signals are responding to this by saying, you don't need more food right now. Let's go through the stores that we have. And I was visibly getting skinnier. Granted, I lost like 6.5 pounds, big whoop, but I could see more shadows forming. I could start to see like an abdominal column. Like, I don't have abs. I'm not going to say that, but it was a visible difference, which was interesting.
Yes, endlessly fascinating to me how just changing the macro content and makeup of what you're eating can have such a dramatically different effect. I mean, we're going to talk a little bit later about what happens when you dramatically alter the carb content, but that's something different. But yes, it's fascinating.
Yeah, and what's interesting is when I was eating omnivorous keto, I was probably eating pretty similarly, especially in the beginning. But it's still, for one, I didn't find the food enjoyable, even though I was eating good food that lots of people would, you know, crow over, I guess. Saag paneer and Indian food and like all this different stuff. But, you know, even before keto, I didn't enjoy food very much. I could tell it was objectively good and tasted good. But it was only after I went carnivore that I actually started to enjoy food and be excited about meals. And I found that especially with keto AF, I was looking forward to meals. And then after I eat it, I was just so happy, like ridiculously happy. Like, if you've ever met Amber O'Hearn, like that ridiculous level of just happiness and skipping around, that's pretty much how I felt all the time, especially after meals, which is, again, fascinating because, especially coming from, you know, I used to have chronic depression, and now comparing that to this, it's just like, if I had told myself even 5 years ago, you're going to be so happy, you're skipping around and, you know, excited about food and all this type of stuff, I would have been like, you're nuts.
Yeah, I mean, forget everything else. If the way you eat makes you that happy, then it's a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it has helped a lot. My cat recently passed away, and it's very stressful and very, very sad. And I was very sad, but at the same time, it never once entered into my head to eat non-carnivorously, let alone carb-heavy, especially coming from the high-carb experiment, which we'll talk about in a second, because I have drilled it into my head from the start of when I first noticed that my depression was going into remission. If you go back to eating that way, it will get worse. And it is going to be really hard to pull yourself out of that, so just don't do it. So there was not even a desire to eat that way. I did go for comfort food, but it was chicken and cream cheese. So I've been eating like exclusively that for like the past week because that's a comfort food, but it's not a self-destructive comfort food. So it was like allowed. But I think just like, I know it's not as simple for everyone, but I think being able to tell myself over and over again for the past 3 years, if you touch that stuff, you are seriously going to regret it and you are going to get worse and it's not going to help. And yes, go for carnivorous comfort food if you feel you have to, but it doesn't really do anything. Like, it's not actually like you eat it and you numb yourself out. It's just like you eat it and it's like, oh, I'm full now. Okay.
And it helps sometimes when you've got something like your presentation coming up. It's like, I can't afford to be feeling really, really awful because I've got to give this presentation.
Yeah, so she passed away while I was prepping for Low Carb Houston. And it's like, this is a presentation I've been looking to for a very, very long time. And Nadir, who is the host of the conference, is one of my favorite people. And I've talked about this topic with him before, and I'm really excited to share this information with him and the people in his town. Like, I can't, self-indulge in this self-destructive behavior, especially when it's not gonna fix anything. It's not gonna raise cats from the grave and bring her back. That's not gonna happen. And I'm gonna feel even worse, and, the presentation isn't gonna be as good as it should be and as much as it deserves to be. And so instead of doing that, I ended up just funneling a lot of my grief into knitting a hat for a friend who had also lost her cat a couple years ago, and kind of knitting this gift for her as thanks for her support and understanding, and then also just funneling a lot of energy into working on the presentation until first thing in the morning until 10 p.m. at night, just working on the slides and tweaking the general outline and stuff like that. And I think it resulted in a potentially really good presentation. A lot of effort went into it, and I'm feeling good about it, but it's I can't afford to get back to that place again where I used to be before keto. It's just not acceptable. And especially, like I said, with the high carb experiment, I know exactly what that would feel like, and I can't, I really don't want to be like that at Low Carb Houston. I want to be able to enjoy myself, even if I am sad at times. It's okay to be sad. I'll just be sad. It's fine.
So tell us a bit about, quickly then, you've discussed the physical impact of what it was like when you did the Keto AF experiment, and we've seen what happened with April. What happened with the data? Because, of course, you would have had that too.
Yeah, so I actually wasn't sure what the blood work was going to look like. I did essentially a hypothesis and methods post for the cholesterol code members and patrons. Said, this is what I'm going to be doing. And I even said in that post, this is an exploratory experiment. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't even know if anything is going to happen. But I got blood work regardless. I got a wide spectrum test at the start where I tested things like vitamin C and vitamin A and all that type of stuff. And then I did another one of those at the end. And somewhat unfortunately, but I'm also appreciative of the data, the two last data points, for one of them, I had a cold, so things were all weird. And then for the last one, I had accidentally fallen asleep at the farm and gotten a sunburn all down my back. And sunburn, in case you weren't aware, causes inflammation, which really messes up your lab results. So those essentially had to be excluded because they were non-representative. But I did get follow-up lab work after Keto Fest, which was after the high carb experiment. So that's also, is it representative, is it not? But my levels have actually stayed pretty steady after that point from what I've been seeing on my home monitor. HDL is up, which is nice because mine has been perpetually low. It has been kind of trending up over the years, but it's never really been consistently above 50, and it has been since then. The check I did in August was HDL at 67, which is okay. Triglycerides stayed low despite eating all the fat. That's not surprising because I'm using it effectively.
It's one of the things, isn't it, to increase good fats if you need to get your HDL up. That's one of the things that's recommended, isn't it? So you would expect it potentially to go up.
HDL tends to track with fat intake in general and also saturated fat intake. But one thing I've noticed, because I've done other experiments where I was eating 4,000 to 6,000 calories a day, is my HDL would go up, but it wouldn't really go up a lot. It would kind of stick within the same range. So because it's up and staying there and up above my normal, I kind of find that significant, and I'm curious as to if it'll stay there. And on the recent checks I've done with my home monitor, my triglycerides have been so low, it won't calculate the LDL, because if triglycerides are below 30, it's just I don't know what to tell you. It messes up the formula. But I would guess my LDL is around 150, just by kind of eyeballing it. At the baseline, when I was eating the higher protein, it was around 220, I want to say, which was around my normal. And I think both are considered high, but it's interesting. I was kind of conflicted over whether LDL would go down or LDL would go up. And it's consistently down, which is interesting. Lipoprotein(a), which is what I'll be giving a presentation on at Low Carb Houston. I found in my own data that it tends to track with LDL-C, and it has continued to do so, so it's generally down quite a bit. Not quite into the normal range, but down for sure. So, yeah, things are interesting. Other than that, everything else seemed fine. The vitamin C test that I had done was in range both times, so still no scurvy. It would be interesting if I got scurvy, but no luck so far, which is interesting.
Interesting from a data point of view, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, no bleeding gums, no easy bruising, not really anything like that, which are signs of scurvy as well. Low energy is another sign of scurvy, I think, and definitely not had that problem. But that's interesting because a lot of the time people will say, like, you need to eat a pound of meat or whatever to get the amount of vitamin C that you need. But I was only eating about 200 grams of meat and then the rest fat, where I don't think there'd be very much vitamin C in the first place. Amber gave a great talk at CarnivoryCon about things that can impact how much vitamin C you need. So maybe it's related to that. But either way, several months in, no signs of scurvy.
Yeah, that's what I always refer to is her theory about the fact that you're starting from the wrong place.
Right.
So you're starting from thinking that you need more than you do.
Yeah.
Depending how you eat.
And I have seen like some things that are like, well, the metabolism won't change how much you need, like this or that. But it's like, I don't know that I agree with that because L-carnitine, for example, is used for fat metabolism and immune activation and things like that. So that's going to impact. Vitamin C is used for a whole bunch of stuff, antioxidants and like stuff like that, so that's going to impact. Metabolism is a huge difference going from carb-based to fat-based. Like, that's kind of known a little bit. And if you think about it, all these nutrients are pieces that are going into making this engine work. So if you're using a different fuel, a lot of that may necessarily have to change. Like, obviously, there's going to be some things that you still need, no matter what. But iodine is another example that Amber has mentioned. Iodine is used for carbohydrate metabolism, and it tracks with how many carbs you're eating. So the more carbs you're eating, essentially, the more iodine you would need. And there's a paper hypothesizing that the increase in iodine deficiency is actually coming from high-carb diets. You can't get that level of iodine from the soil. And I think the general idea is that the soil is becoming iodine depleted, but they're actually saying it's backwards. We actually need more iodine than we did before because of what we're eating.
Oh, that's interesting. So again, you're not talking about the lack. You're talking about, it's the other way around. You're not talking about what you're not eating. You're talking about eating too much of something that is impacting
the environment. Like anything you put in, any input you put in into the body, and food is input, is going to change the output of what is required to run whatever, program you're trying to run, which is fat metabolism or whatever. And I mean, even things like diabetes. Like I said, L-carnitine is used for immune activation, and L-carnitine deficiency is apparently very good evidence that it exists, even though we can synthesize some of it. Amber has said that it's arguably conditionally essential, which means we can make it, but in certain circumstances we can't make enough of it. And that's kind of supported by L-carnitine supplementation being very helpful in a lot of cases. For example, for depression, L-carnitine deficiency is linked to depression. So if you have something like diabetes or an autoimmune disease, then it could be very well true that you're using more L-carnitine for that immune activation. So if someone is coming from a perspective of obesity or diabetes or metabolic syndrome, it could very well be that they need more of something to come back from that because they're having to do things like repair tissue that hasn't been able to be repaired in a while, or clean up all this junk that's around, all this stuff. And we can see in people with diabetes that it does take them several years to come back from that. And I think in April's case, it makes a very interesting possibility that maybe she needs more of the fat or more of something in the fat, that, she needed that to come back from diabetes and really be able to handle things. That's a off-the-wall speculation. It could very well be wrong. But it makes sense to me that depending on your circumstance and depending on your health history and what your body is trying to deal with, you may need something different than someone who's just trying to lose an extra 5 pounds and they're already generally metabolically healthy and all that type of stuff, where they may be able to calorie restrict and take off that extra 5 pounds. But for other people, they may need something different.
And I find it interesting how stripping away things out of your diet, I was thinking when you were mentioning just then about the way things interact, I think about Georgia Eden, how she talks about different foods counter each other. So you can be having something that's really dense in what you need, but you eat something else with it and it can strip it away.
Yeah.
So by stripping things down to this keto AF way of eating, taking out a lot of the factors that might mitigate the good things that you're getting.
Yeah, and I think that's probably another factor for why it works for some people and not others. Because Sophia Clemens, for example, has shown that a whole lot of conditions relate back to intestinal permeability, where you don't have this really strong wall that keeps a bunch of stuff out. You're kind of letting things leak through, in which case you may be more sensitive to things where other healthy people may not be. So they may be able to handle eating broccoli or spices or dairy or whatever, but in that state, your defenses may not be as good in comparison. So you may be more sensitive. Like Amber has experienced, obviously, in her case, that it's not just a case of maybe adding what's in meat, although that probably is important, but also taking away things that she's currently not in a situation to deal with as well. But I mean, in April's case, she had mentioned that she had tried carnivore for about a month before and was still having issues. And if it's only a case of stripping things away, that would almost make me think that it's multifaceted for why Keto AF is helping her. But just a higher protein carnivorous diet wasn't, especially with the hunger. Because for me, Keto AF changes hunger so significantly.
Yeah, that was a big thing for her as well. I can remember her saying when she was carnivore that she was I still have to eat, so many pork chops to feel full.
And I was definitely the same way. It's such a box of very interesting mysteries that I don't think we've really fully unraveled yet. But at least in my experience, it does work for me. So the high carb experiment we should probably talk about.
Yeah, that's the opposite end of the extremes.
The opposite end.
Make sure to come back next week to find out all about Siobhan's high carb experiment. To get the resources and links from this show, please go to ketowomanpodcast.com/episodes. Please share this podcast with as many people as possible by sharing one of my links or just taking a screenshot of an episode that you enjoyed. Reviews really help raise the profile of the podcast, which gets it in front of more people, but also helps me attract a wide variety of guests. So please take a minute to leave a review on whichever podcast app or platform you like to listen on. It doesn't go unnoticed by me, the people who regularly like, share and comment on my posts. Your support really does mean the world to me. Thank you. Are you enjoying this podcast? Help me make more episodes and videos by making a pledge at my Patreon page, patreon.com/KetoWoman. Or simply hit the support button on the Keto Woman Podcast website. Don't forget to join in the fun on the Keto Woman Podcast Instagram and Facebook pages, and Daisy_Keto Woman on Twitter. Are you my next extraordinary woman? Maybe you've got an idea for a show, a topic you would like to hear about. Let me know how I can tickle your earbuds by dropping me a line at daisy@ketowomanpodcast.com. This week's end quote is from Tony Robbins. If you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always gotten. Bye-bye, Keto Lovelies.